What is up, and welcome back to Talking Nutrition. Today I'm joined by Allie, Saez. I just had to double check and ask how to pronounce that last name. How are you, Allie?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm great. I'm great. Good to see you again.
Good to see you
So Allie and I met through a functional nutrition course that I did, and then she's been a great help for me in terms of breaking down complex cases. I learned a lot from her, and I wanted to bring her on to talk about gut health because it's a very complex topic. Good thing is that we're pretty able to do a lot by ourselves, right? By some basic nutrition and lifestyle changes. So we want to kind of break down what it really means, right? Gut health, digestion, kind of troubleshooting that, her own journey with gut issues, and then we'll just take it from there. Common issues, root causes of those issues, and again, bringing it back to what you can do if you are dealing with any of these issues. So let's actually start there, Allie. Like, why are we here, right? Why are you a functional coach? Like, what got you into that?
Yeah. So obviously I'm Allie. I'm a functional health coach, and my passion for gut health really started during medical school, actually, when I was struggling with my own health, ironically enough. So I used to think like being bloated all the time was completely normal, no matter what I ate. But when I really started learning how the gut impacts everything from your metabolism to your energy to your skin, it really changed my approach to health, right? So now I can help clients kind of all over the globe really take control of their gut, restore their metabolism, and optimize their health from the inside out so that they can really look as well as feel their best. So I'm super excited to dive into this topic with you today.
Awesome. Yeah, because so what were the main things you personally struggle with?
Yeah, so bloating for sure. I mean, regardless of what I was eating, I felt like at that time I was eating really clean or eating the foods that I should be, right? In terms of mostly whole foods. But I was also drinking a lot of caffeine and things like that as well. But bloating was one of the main things. I had really low energy all the time. I remember waking up and just not wanting to get out of bed. My skin was breaking out, and then kind of just overall feeling really puffy and inflamed, like this layer of just inflammation that I couldn't get rid of. And then poor recovery as well from workouts and things like that.
Well, I wanted to expand on that because I think those are pretty common. Like a lot of people kind of struggle with that. Low energy, maybe acne. We just talked about this before we hit record, right? A lot of people get on, the pill or any medications for those things. Well, that actually might be an underlying issue, right? Which oftentimes can be gut related. Cool. So at some point you were like, hey, something's up, and I'm just being told like, well, I'm just stressed, right? And this is normal. How did you kind of like ultimately figure this out for yourself?
Yeah. So, I mean, during that time, like I said, I was in medical school. I went to a few different doctors, and the response to the symptoms that I was having based on the lab work, the very basic panel that they just kind of ran was like, well, everything's normal. This looks good. So here's a medication for your stomach pain, and kind of sent me on my way. And at that point, I just kind of took a moment and was like, that's just how it is. That's it. Like, that's the only solution that you can give me. And also at that point, I had to ask myself the question, was I supposed to accept that being unwell was really part of the journey to becoming a doctor? And I refused to believe that. I knew that there kind of had to be more to the story at that point. And so that's when I really started searching for answers and found functional health coaching. So I became a client, and that really changed everything because for the first time, someone actually listened to what I was dealing with and kind of validated that everything that I had going on was real. And so we did a little bit of digging. We did in-depth testing. I found out I had SIBO, which is small intestine bacterial overgrowth going on. I had super high cortisol, so my stress hormone was through the roof. I was also pre-diabetic, so my glucose was all over the place and had completely dysregulated hormones. And so, at that point, even though I was dealing with all of these symptoms, I was just super excited and thankful because I finally had a plan in place to like know where to start and how to actually get better. And so that's kind of when my healing journey started, and slowly kind of started just feeling like me again.
I love that. It's tricky too because, obviously you went to look for help and you didn't get it from the doctor. And I'm also not going to talk shit on doctors, but it does happen a lot. Like people get their blood drawn. Sure, right? We get a couple of values, but it's maybe not even showing you the big picture. And then even if you have a more in-depth kind of, lab panel, even then they'll oftentimes just be like, well, it looks good. You're fine.
Exactly.
But then you're here like, no, like I'm actually not fine. I can clearly tell, my energy sucks. I have acne and all these things. So there's got to be something. And I think that's pretty, maybe, I don't want to say dangerous, but like when someone goes for help or goes, to the doctor for help and they're being told like, hey, well, no, you're fine. Like you said, well, at some point you're going to be like, well, I guess that's just how it's going to be. And there's nothing I can do about it. Exactly. There's absolutely something you can do about it. And I think as a whole, we can do better, with that and trying to get people that help, which is, of course, why you got into functional, which is pretty upcoming. I feel like these days it's good. There's unfortunately also a lot of misconceptions or misinformation around there. And, people are taking things out of context and oversimplifying. And it's not something we can oversimplify because going back to gut health, it's actually very complex, right?
Exactly. And two, I think at that point, it's really where I saw the missing link, right? Between where conventional medicine's limitations are and where like true healing is. Because when they're looking at those values, it's really, okay, you're not in a disease state. Everything looks good. But when we start looking at things functionally, there's a much shorter, much narrower range of where these lab values should be, right? And that's really where you get more information to really feel your best. It's not just, you're healthy because you don't have disease. And that's the really big distinction between functional.
Yeah. And it's also prevention. I mean, from things getting worse, but even just actually getting sick, right? So what was, so how long, let me ask you this. So would you say like by now, like things have kind of healed and you're good? Or is it still something you're going to manage?
I feel like in the realm of stress, that's always going to be something, that's I'm going to have to manage just because of the industry that we're in. But apart from that, now I really have the lifestyle tools in place to prevent what got me to having these issues in the first place, So I know how to manage my stress better. I know that drinking coffee first thing in the morning on an empty stomach isn't the best for your cortisol or for your gut health. I know slow down when I'm eating and not work at my desk for my meals. So all of those things play into it. And, before I had my issues, I thought that I was, doing all the right things, quote unquote, with the way I was training, with the way I was eating. So I could not understand how I ended up with these gut issues. But now looking back and everything that I know now, it makes perfect sense. And so, at this point, I'm sitting in a really good spot. It definitely took a while. I went through pretty extensive gut protocols. But once that was fixed, it was really amazing to see how everything else kind of started to click in place and just how working on gut health affected so many other areas.
Yeah. Because how long did it take, like roughly, to go through that whole process being like, hey, we're starting now with, the functional coaching? To a point where you were like, okay, now we're kind of good and we can just manage and maintain?
I would say in its entirety, probably about 2 years. But from working on like the gut health aspect of things, probably about 6 to 8 months. Yeah. I want to bring that up because it's not going to be a quick little, couple week thing. No.
It's hard. It's very strict. And of course, we'll talk more about some basics, but like going through an actual gut protocol, and you taught me this stuff, right? It's very strict, very particular. It's very difficult to stick to. Very difficult, actually, for most people. It's going to be, I'm not going to say impossible, but, it takes quite a bit, There's supplementation involved. There's things like, hey, you're not going to train for a while, right? Hey, you're going to slow down. And that's making it even more difficult because generally speaking, we're working with people who are looking to get fit, build muscle, lose fat. Then hearing, hey, you're not allowed to train for, a couple of weeks, months even. That's hard. But we got to fix the gut in order even to see the actual results we want. Even if that's just fat loss or just muscle gain,
Exactly. No, totally. Because like I said, your gut health is going to affect everything. And the average client, coming into me, they're overworked, they're overtrained, and they're typically undernourished, right? And they just want to push harder to get the results that they want. But at the end of the day, if your gut health is off, it's going to affect your hormones, it's going to affect your recovery, and you're not going to see the results that you want, that you're putting forward into your nutrition, into the gym, because your recovery and the way that you're absorbing these nutrients and things like that are not nearly going to be as good either, right? So it sets the foundation for almost everything else.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you brought that one up because you can eat all the food, but if you're not absorbing the nutrients, right, your body is still not really able to use it. So it absolutely plays into your physical, results. Let's actually like slow down a bit and kind of expand on what gut health really means, right? And, digestion, of course, we know we all got to go to the bathroom. But I still think like we have a very mixed idea of what, normal, in quotes, bowel movements look like and how often we're supposed to go. And it's always a funny one when I bring it up first with my clients too, but it's like, hey, if we're going all the time or not at all, or we're super constipated or we have diarrhea all the time, like those are symptoms that something is up, you know what I mean? So what is gut health? Like just a basic kind of...
So gut health really kind of just refers to the balance of bacteria and function of your digestive systems, right? So this is going to include your gut microbiome, which houses the trillions of bacteria within your gut, right? This is also going to include the health of your gut lining, the connection between your gut and the rest of your body, so including your metabolism, your immune system, and your brain. And so when your gut is really healthy, you're going to digest and absorb your nutrients really efficiently. You're going to maintain steady energy. Your immune system is going to be in a really good spot. And you're going to be able to regulate your mood and your hormones a lot better. When your gut is unhealthy, you may experience symptoms like bloating, fatigue, food sensitivities, brain fog, and just kind of inflammation throughout your entire body. But the biggest thing is like your gut microbiome, right? So your trillions of bacteria kind of going on that are going to help you digest your food, absorb your nutrients. And when there's an issue, when we have an imbalance of these good bacteria in our gut versus these bad bacteria, which can cause inflammation, they cause more bloating, more cravings, more inflammation, and just metabolic issues, right? And so it's really, really important to have the right balance of gut bacteria that's going to influence these digestions and other functions within the gut.
Because you're always going to have a ratio of good versus bad bacteria, correct?
Yes, correct. We just don't want the bad to outweigh the good.
Absolutely, yeah. And this may be like, I'm going a little ahead already, but like when people are being put on antibiotics, that can actually be a negative thing down the road too, because we're also getting rid of the good bacteria, right?
Correct. Yeah. So, I mean, in the beginning, antibiotics, you'll probably feel a little bit better of when you initially take those. The problem with antibiotics is, although they work really well in the beginning, the chance of relapse is almost 60%. And the reason being is because they're just focusing on the remove phase of getting rid of those bacteria. But like you said, it also gets rid of some of that good bacteria. But antibiotics are really also hard on the gut lining, right? So it kind of creates more permeability, more holes within that gut lining, and that's going to cause more issues in and of itself. And so if we just remove the bad bacteria from antibiotics and we're not focusing on replacing our good bacteria as well as honing in on the gut lining, this is where we run into issues. And that's one of the main things that I see as well is people coming in who've been on antibiotics repeatedly for several years, whether that's for skin things, just chronic infections, and this just causes more gut issues over time in and of itself.
Yeah. I actually know someone who was put on a few cycles, I think 4 or 5 in a relatively short period of time.
Oh my gosh.
I think they were bit by a tick like twice in a pretty short period of time. So obviously, right, you're going to need that, some gut things. And also her skin was really bad. She was struggling with, what's it called again? Psoriasis, I think it's called, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So her hands were really bad. And again, like doing another, round of antibiotics, like can actually make it worse, Exactly. If we're not focusing on, the good bacteria. But okay, so obviously it's very important to maintain good gut health, right? We kind of touch on the symptoms, like if it's off. How can someone tell, like, hey, I'm probably pretty good in terms of like digestion? And
yeah, I would say if they're pretty good, one, you're not going to have any just digestive symptoms, which is obvious. You don't have any red flags in terms of bloating, constipation, diarrhea, acid reflux, gas, burping, undigested food in your stool, things like that. I would say overall, your energy is pretty good and stable throughout the day. you're not having any skin issues. So your skin, you're not having breakouts consistently, or like you talked about, eczema, rashes, psoriasis, or just kind of chronic puffiness or inflammation. Mood is relatively stable. And then I would say another big one too is probably sugar cravings as well. So an imbalanced gut can absolutely mess with like your hunger hormones and your cravings as well. And then you don't really have any food sensitivities. And another big one is that 70% of your immune system lives within the gut. So if you don't get sick super often, or you find that you are getting sick, every month, every 2 months, that's probably a sign that there's something going on gut-wise.
I'm happy that I checked most of those boxes, so that's good. It's just, I think for me, the main one also, like you, is managing stress and making sure I sleep well.
Yeah.
But I'm like never sick, and like, it's good to know,
The two hardest ones, stress and sleep.
Yeah, they're hard. Like I also tell people, like I've been talking about this a lot with my clients recently, because, once someone is on a roll with nutrition and training and that's going well, and maybe they're in the fat loss phase, whatever, and they're just able to execute there, like if sleep sucks or stress management, needs to be addressed.
Right.
Okay, great. Like you're already in a good place food and fitness wise. Like let's actually just focus on this week, go to bed on time, or do this to slow down, or, explore more stress management techniques, because it's so key. Like, do you think, I know this is the case, but like, do you think that the majority of gut, but maybe just functional issues in general, are related to stress?
1000%. And even when I'm working on a client with gut health, one of the main things that we focus on first is stress. And the reason being is because we can do everything physically. I can put you through a gut protocol. We can work on your gut bacteria and all the things. But if you are in a constant state of stress, to where your body is always in that fight or flight response, that is going to repeatedly signal to your gut to slow down digestion. It's going to trigger more inflammation, right? Because your gut and your brain axis are completely tied together. So that needs to be addressed first and foremost, because if we don't address those things, chances are you're going to have these gut issues later on down the line. They're going to come back because we didn't address the root cause.
It's hard too, because the few clients I've helped with some gut issues were very high stress individuals. And that was the main thing, even during the protocol. Like that was the hardest shit, because I think oftentimes it's also like high, like achieving individuals. Like we're setting the bar high, and we have this identity of where I was working hard and pushing, and we'll rather work 24 hours instead of sleeping more. Like it makes it even more difficult, I think, for those people, because they're the ones who need to slow down the most, but they also have the hardest time slowing down.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I see that a lot. And it's important, right? Because your gut and your brain are in kind of constant communication, right? So the vagus nerve is your highway between that gut and the brain. And so it signals both ways, right? So our brain, whether we have a perceived stress, emotional, anxiety, physical stress, it's going to send signals to our gut to slow down digestion, which is going to cause bloating and kind of trigger more inflammation. We're not going to produce as much stomach acid. But on the flip side of that too, our gut is also going to send signals to our brain. So if we have an inflamed gut, it's going to send these stress signals to our brain, which is going to affect our mood, our focus, and kind of just overall mental clarity. And a really good example of that too is if you've ever felt really nervous before an event and you've had to use the bathroom or something like that, that's literally your vagus nerve in action, connecting those two, which is why it's so important to, it doesn't mean that you have to slow down forever, but we have to figure out ways to lower your overall stress levels to really work on the gut efficiently.
Which, as much as, there's food things and, lifestyle factors, that's probably the main one, right?
100%.
I think it's probably good to expand a bit on what stress really means, because I think most people are still on the impression that it's just, work-related stress, traffic or financials or relationships or something. But there's way more to it, right? There's more types of stress.
Totally. Yeah, when we're talking about stress, we really want to talk about it in 3 different buckets. So mental or emotional stress, right? So a lot of what you just kind of talked about in terms of work, relationships, all of that. Physical stress, so our training, are we going really hard in the gym and not recovering enough from it? And then the chemical stress side of things, right? So that's going to be our medications, toxins that we're exposed to in our household products, or just even the environment, or medications for that matter as well. And so when our stress buckets become way too full and we're not having ways to, alleviate that stress, then this is where we have symptoms kind of show up, right? And so it's not necessarily just looking at the emotional component of it. It's how can we lower overall stress levels in all of these areas? And physical activity is just one that's easier for people, right? Because it's something that we can measure. Whereas the emotional component of things, how they perceive their stress and really trying to reframe of that is some of the work that's a little bit harder.
Definitely, yeah. Now, I specifically wanted to bring this up because before, like earlier, we already mentioned, hey, like periods of time where you do not exercise. And that is because of that stress management. Which again is hard. We see a lot of people being really into it, doing CrossFit especially, or running. And it's hard going back to identity. If you have that identity of I'm a CrossFitter, I'm a runner, and I go hard every time, it's really difficult to not do that because you're missing part of who you are. You know what I mean?
I get it. I mean, that was me, right?
Yeah.
That was me when I started having all of my gut issues. I was doing CrossFit. I was doing Orange Theory. And when my coach told me that I had to stop doing HIIT training and step away from that and focus on yoga and walking, I'm like, what do you mean? How am I going to get the results just doing walking and yoga? And it's really, it takes time to understand how all of these things work together. And it doesn't mean that that's the way that you're going to train forever. But while you're going through, a gut protocol and really working on healing, getting into that parasympathetic rest and digest state is so, so crucial. And so, taking time to slow down, get into that parasympathetic state to really focus on healing. And then when you're in a much better place and you can respond to stress better, then we can go ahead and increase your activity. We can push your workouts a little bit harder, So it's just seasons.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's good to clarify too that like these types of training is not bad per se, it just depends on the overall stress load, right? Because all those buckets are really one big bucket, and if that's just adding up to being too much, like we gotta lower it somehow.
Exactly.
And that's one of the like lower hanging fruit ones, like if we got exercise, at least we can control that. Plus we can go on a walk or do yoga, which doesn't only not stress the system, but actually calms down the system even more. So we're really just trying to bring that stress down. But we got to understand that those types of training, like it's very high intensity, right? Which means that we get into that stress state, fight or flight, which isn't a bad thing per se. Again, like I want to clarify this because I know we got CrossFitters and runners listening. Like it's not bad per se, but if stress is too high and we got to deal with these issues, it's got to go for a little while.
And you're going to know if your stress is too high, if you're not seeing results from your workout, if you're having any of these other symptoms that we're talking about, and just taking a break for a little bit. Your workouts are going to look a little bit different temporarily, but it doesn't have to be that way forever by any means. Once you're done with healing, now I'm pushing harder in my workouts. I'm not doing HIIT or Orange Theory like I was beforehand. That kind of got me into that mess, but take into account everything that you have going on in your life. Because during that time when I was experiencing a lot of these gut issues, I was in a very high stress student, right? I was going through a breakup. I was overtraining. I was under eating. So like all of those things in combination with each other just did not lead up to good results, right? Instead, things got way worse.
Yeah, for sure. And again, like activity wise and stress management, like those are the main changes there, I would say. As you are trying to heal your gut, right? So food-wise, you just mentioned under eating, right? So how does food play a role here? And what are like the main things we want to make sure to cover to maybe not even just heal, but just kind of keep our gut health in a good spot?
Yeah, I mean, I would say one, making sure that you're eating enough fiber. Majority of us are not eating nearly enough fiber at all. So I would say anywhere for females, probably 35 to 40 grams of fiber, males closer to like 45, even 50, because your prebiotics are going to be food for your beneficial bacteria. And if we're not getting enough of that, it's going to have an impact on our gut microbiome. And also on the other side of that, it's also going to really impact our gut lining, because that fiber kind of coats that gut lining and helps prevent it from kind of breaking down. And that's where we see more issues in terms of like leaky gut. So definitely increasing your fiber for sure. I would say water intake is a huge one, and that's an easy one, right? Because if we're not drinking enough water, that's where we see also a little bit more constipation, and then motility kind of slows down. And then that's where we have a little bit more opportunity for bad bacteria to kind of overgrow if things are not moving through the way that they should be. Probiotics are super important. However, the only thing that I will say is that they're not necessarily the main factor. A lot of my clients kind of coming in are saying, well, I'm taking this probiotic and I'm still having these gut issues and all the things. And the issue is that if we have an imbalance in our bacteria, so the good bacteria versus the bad bacteria, taking a probiotic can actually just be kind of adding fuel to the fire, if you will, if there's already an abundance of bacteria going on. So the last thing that we want to do is throw more bacteria on top of that when we're having an issue. And so, yes, probiotics are great, but there's a specific time to add them in, and you don't necessarily want to be taking the same probiotic all the time either, because different probiotics are going to have different strains, which are going to equal different functions within the body. So I would say those are probably one of the three things. There's definitely a lot of different foods that you can add in to support gut health, one of them being like apple cider vinegar, aloe vera juice, bone broth. Those are all going to support the gut lining, help support, your gut microbiome balance. But whole food diet, kind of just very general, lots of fiber support, and variation within that.
Yeah, I love that. So going back to the pre and probiotics, right? So you can get those from food or, supplementation, of course. I love that you brought up that it needs to be a specific strain for a certain, scenario. You don't want to have the same all the time. On top of that, there's a lot of low quality options on the market. And it's very common for people to just jump on them because they hear online, hey, I got to do this for my gut health. And they just get any probiotic, not knowing there's different strains. And so let's say like someone comes in for help with you, right? And they're already on those. Do you just remove them altogether and say, hey, let's hold off for a little while and make sure that we address those basics first, and then of course get into supplementation after?
Yeah, that is usually the case. So when they first come in and I see that they're on a probiotic or even prebiotic, so thinking about like your greens powders and things like that, I will take those out temporarily, right? Because before we're adding any of these things back in, we want to make sure that we're getting rid of the inflammatory bacteria. And so there's no point in adding in, these probiotic and prebiotic support if we're trying to get rid of bacteria that's causing inflammation rather than supporting its growth, right? So they will come off of that for a time period. And this is where we get into a little bit more of like a 5R gut protocol. So removing kind of the bad bacteria first, replacing it with whole foods, lots of fiber, digestive enzymes. And then once we work through that phase, which could be anywhere from 6 weeks all the way to 16 weeks, depending on how advanced your gut issues are, that's when we will bring back the probiotics and the good bacteria and kind of add those in, right? So if we think about it in terms of like a lawn analogy, we want to remove all of the weeds before we go in and plant the seeds for new grass, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Because that first phase, right, that remove phase, there's a lot of removal. It's pretty strict, right? That's where you would get on an elimination diet. What does that look like for someone? Like, what are some of the foods? I'm thinking too now of specific clients who mentioned that they, in quotes, have always struggled with, their gut, and that their doctor put them on a low FODMAP diet, but they were on there for like super long, right? But this is the actual period where you would want to use that, correct?
Correct. Yeah. So temporarily, if they're really struggling with a lot of gut symptoms, we will probably go lower FODMAP, low histamine, but you cannot stay there forever, because once you come out of that, your symptoms are going to come back just like they did before, or eventually it's not going to work anymore. A key part of this is really, one, diet variation, but two, getting your gut to a place of like resilience so that when you do add those things back in, you're not having these symptoms anymore. Because going lower FODMAP, if you don't have the prebiotic and fiber support within that, you're still not supporting your gut microbiome in a way that's healthy long term.
Yeah. Because it's supposed to be a short-term thing to then work on healing and then bring back those other foods. Because a lot of times I think, so you'll often hear these, right? Dairy and gluten and whatever. They're just inherently bad for you if you need to believe social media. But like a lot of times it's not the actual food or the compound that's the issue, right? It's actually the gut that's unable to fully like break those foods down.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you have, I mean, that's one of the telltale signs is like food sensitivities or any kind of food allergies, right? So if you, one, have chronic exposure to like gluten, dairy, processed sugars, like you said, those are easy ones to kind of remove right off the bat. Doesn't mean you're going to be removing them forever. I don't advise that. But regardless, those kind of food sensitivities are going to cause more immune reactions, which is going to cause more bloating, more fatigue, more skin issues, more brain fog. But with that, you know, the goal of the gut protocol, once we're done with this, is that you're not as reactive to these foods. So when you do have them, you're not having the bloating and the gut symptoms, right? So you can do that through a lot of different ways. I mean, the biggest thing is, I would say, testing and not guessing about what's going on with your gut, for sure. You could do like an MRT, which is going to be a food sensitivity test as well. But the food sensitivity test is usually just a quick way to kind of reduce overall inflammation. But again, it's not a long-term solution. You really want to get to the root of like kind of what's going on within the gut so that you're not having those reactions in the long term.
Yeah. Because with the food sensitivity tests, I've heard that this can both be influenced by foods you have not been eating for a while, as well as foods you very recently ate. Like, what are some of the better tests for that? Because I think a lot of them are not that great, right?
Correct. Yeah. I'm not a big fan of like the IgG food sensitivity testing, which is going to be your pretty standard testing when you go to your doctor, and that's what they're going to run. It's not super accurate and isn't super helpful. So one of my preferred tests is the MRT test. It looks at like 167 different foods and chemicals that you are kind of exposed to, and then rates them on your reactivity levels. But it's not just looking at your reaction, it's actually looking at your immune system upregulation in response to these foods, which just provides a lot more value in terms of really targeting that and then kind of slowly reintroducing those foods over time. But I would say, yeah, it's probably not worth your time to get an IgG food sensitivity test.
Fair enough. Is that similar to the GI map, or would that be in a different scenario kind of?
GI map is going to be a stool test, right? So you're going to do that at home. An MRT test is going to be a blood test that you'll have to go get done at a lab. So they're a little bit different.
Awesome. So, you know, people go through like a removal phase and then we start to, right, work on healing. This is where supplementation is very important too, right?
Correct. Yeah. Gut protocols are always going to be a little bit more supplement heavy just because we want to use a rotation of different herbs to really get rid of that inflammatory bacteria, as well as support digestion with digestive enzymes such as hydrochloric acid support, pancreatic enzymes, maybe even like ox bile to help break down fats, because your body is not doing that super efficiently, right? And it will, but in the beginning, it just needs a little bit more support. And so that's kind of the main focus in the beginning. And as we transition out of that remove phase into the reinoculate phase, then that's where we're pulling out those antimicrobial herbs. We're adding in probiotics. We're adding in more gut lining support. And then it's kind of really just maintenance. You're not going to be on those gut supplements forever, but I would say a rotation of probiotics post-care is important.
Yeah. Because realistically speaking, like let's say someone has issues with, I don't know, gluten, dairy, whatever it is. Right? There's a good chance they're going to be able to eat those foods again afterwards, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Now, most of the time on the GI map, you will be able to see if they have a gluten sensitivity or something like that. And it really just depends on the individual client. Like after, going through a gut protocol, they may be able to tolerate a little bit more dairy or gluten. For other people, it's something that they're still going to be a little bit more sensitive to, but it also depends on what kind of dairy they're consuming, right? Is it more whole source dairy? Is it more processed dairy? And same thing with the gluten as well. So it depends on their sources, and also really just depends on the bio-individuality of the person. But I would say in general, they can absolutely tolerate those things better.
Yeah. That's why I think it's so important to work with someone who's an expert in this field, right? Whereas like you can go online for general information, which people do already for general fitness advice and health, and even that is already a mess. But it's like you might be struggling with this stuff and go to Google or Instagram or even TikTok or something to try to find that information. And sure, there's a lot of info out there, but it might not apply to you. It might be completely wrong, because we both know as well, there's a lot of stuff out there that's just misapplied and misunderstood, maybe oversimplified. So it's so key to actually like you, right? Go ask for help. And even if the doctor, again, like with yourself, isn't able to fully help you, then you still need to make a point of looking for help and finding an expert. And that is difficult if you don't have the right connections, or you don't know who to go to, and maybe you'll fall for some program, or, but like, you got to make a point of just, hey, I'm going to figure this out, and I'll stick with that. And even if there's a bunch of setbacks, like, okay, like, let me try again, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it's definitely not a one size fits all approach. And, I tried kind of healing my gut, quote unquote, by myself, going on Google, reading what I was supposed to do. And it's all take a probiotic, add more probiotic foods, drink your kombucha, all of that. And I didn't realize that I was probably making it actually worse, right? And so my biggest piece of advice is test, don't guess, really figure out what's going on. And then you can have someone guide you through that process of making sure, symptoms are moving in the right direction. And that's not to say too, like, sometimes your symptoms will get a little bit worse before they feel better, right? Because you are detoxing a lot, you're getting rid of that gut bacteria. But yeah, I would say definitely bio-individuality is super important, and making sure that you have a plan in place that is suited for you and not just generic advice.
Yeah, because so you struggle with SIBO. There's other conditions as well, and of course different kinds of gut issues. Is the general approach similar? So is it like a 5R protocol just across the board? Is there specific changes some people need to make for specific conditions? Or
yeah, that's a great question. I would say there are general staples within the 5R gut protocol that we definitely use. There's going to be some overlap in between there, but even, for example, with like IBS, so irritable bowel syndrome, when you're having more, bloating, constipation, diarrhea, any of that, it typically comes back to an imbalance in the gut microbiome, right? So it's still the same process in terms of, we really want to see what's going on within the gut with a stool test. And from there, we can make some decisions in terms of what herbs we want to use, what probiotics we want to use. Is there gut lining that we need to address, gut lining support? Because, whether you have SIBO, whether you have IBS, whether you have acid reflux, there's something going on gut-wise, and the three main areas are going to be your gut microbiome, your gut lining, and then digestive enzyme support.
You mentioned acid reflux, right? Is it often low or high stomach acid?
Typically, it's an issue of low stomach acid, believe it or not.
That's why I asked, because a lot of times people will get the idea that it's actually high, but oftentimes it's low, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And some of the worst cases that I see in terms of poor gut microbiomes is from people who are on chronic proton pump inhibitors to reduce acid reflux, right? Yeah. Because that low stomach acid is going to, affect your digestion in terms of your nutrients. So you're not going to absorb those nutrients as well. It's going to promote bad bacterial overgrowth, and also can promote food fermenting within the gut as well, which is just going to cause more symptoms. So majority of the time, I will help my clients kind of walk off those PPIs, whether it's omeprazole or whatever it is. We actually have to support that with stomach acid support. So whether that's betaine, hydrochloric acid, apple cider vinegar, digestive bitters, things like that, to actually bring those levels back up. Because
PPIs, right? So just for the listener, because a lot of people are taking them, what is that?
It's a proton pump inhibitor. So it is going to help slow down your production of stomach acid.
And why would someone be taking that or being put on it?
Yeah, if they have acid reflux, if they have heartburn and things like that. But again, usually the root cause of acid reflux is not too much stomach acid. It's actually too little.
So instead of helping, it may actually be making it worse.
Correct. Yeah. Majority of the time, that's correct.
Because I was going to say, are there cases also where it is actually too high and that is the right thing to do?
Yeah, there are definitely some cases in terms, but it's never you never want to be on that for 10 plus years, right? So there has to be other opportunities in order to intervene with high stomach acid as well. So whether that's adding in more support for the gut lining, whether that's working on some of the stress management tools that we talked about as well. There's definitely things that you can do even if someone has higher stomach acid as well.
Nice. Awesome. Again, I feel like we could just keep going because it's like there's so many different, like sides to this and different conditions. But let's kind of recap on like the basic things that someone can do: nutrition, lifestyle, maybe activity wise, right? Stress management wise, to at least support like optimal gut health and digestion. Assuming we're not dealing with like an actual issue where like we need to go more into detail.
Yeah. So easy tips. One, just kind of supporting digestion first, is slowing down when you're eating. So really taking a moment to just like take a deep breath before your meals to start activating digestion. Because the brain phase of digestion is going to start when you see, smell, and you taste food, right? Which is going to send signals to the stomach to start producing stomach acid as well as your digestive enzymes. So that in and of itself is going to start activating that digestive process. If we eat in a really stressed out state, digestion is going to slow down because the body is going to prioritize that fight or flight state over digestion. So chew your food really well. Each bite should be about like 20 to 30 times because the more you chew, the more surface area you create, which means that it's easier for those enzymes to do their job later on in the digestive process, right? I would say another tip would be to try like digestive bitters or even apple cider vinegar before meals. Because as we just talked about, most people don't produce as much stomach acid, which is going to lead to like bloating, acid reflux, poor nutrient absorption. But apple cider vinegar in and of itself has a lot of properties that are super beneficial for the gut. So one is going to help break down your proteins into amino acids a little bit better. So super important if you're trying to build a muscle as well to get the most out of your food. It's going to help kill off harmful bacteria within the intestines. It's also going to trigger further digestive enzyme release for better digestion. It's going to help you absorb your minerals better. And then also it's going to help support blood sugar too. So apple cider vinegar has been shown to reduce your post-meal blood sugars anywhere from like 20 to 30%. So if that's something that you're also concerned about, it's great for stabilizing those blood sugar levels.
Nice.
Yeah, but diet-wise, as we talked about already too, I would say focusing on fiber for really feeding your gut bacteria, including, some fermentable foods like sauerkraut, kimchi, or yogurts, managing your stress levels and that gut-brain axis. Hydration is really going to be non-negotiable. And then supplementation, of course, but it's not going to be a magic fix. But I would say digestive enzymes are an easy one, as well as like L-glutamine for gut lining support.
Nice. And I often get this with clients where they're being told to throw in a fiber supplement too, where, excuse me, where I will usually take them off of that and say, hey, look, we're getting 8 grams of fiber, whatever, from the supplement. You can hit that with real food. Like you can get that from real food and get the additional micronutrients, the water and the actual volume right with that. Because we don't really need a fiber supplement, right?
No, most of the time, unless you're doing some really specific diet in terms of keto or something like that, if you are eating whole nutrient dense foods for majority of your meals, you're going to be hitting your fiber goals. The problem is most people are not.
Yeah, no, that's true. Like I just had a client recently and she's like been killing it with her fiber. And I told her like, yo, like your intake is way higher than most people, she's just hitting like 40 grams with ease. And I'm like, great. That's awesome. Like, I want people to get to that point,
Yeah, exactly.
Of course, there is also a amount that could be too much fiber, but in my experience, like most people don't even get close to that number.
Yeah. I mean, if you get to a point where you're having a lot of constipation and things like that, then absolutely you could have a little bit of an imbalance between soluble fiber and insoluble fiber, and that's another thing. But in general, when you're really trying to support gut health, one of the easiest things to do is get your fiber intake up through whole foods.
Yeah, again, for the other benefits too, because it's extra water, it's actual volume, so you stay full, right? The vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients, it's so important. You're not going to get that from that little fiber pill, you know?
No, not even close.
Not even close. Awesome. Allie, thank you for sharing all this. I think, like I said, you know, there's so many other, you know, directions we could go with this, but I think we have a really good overview now of gut health, you know, a little bit about the gut protocol, right? The 5R process. Where can people find you? And do you have any like updates or, you know, announcements to share with us?
Yeah, so people can find me on my Instagram. It's Allie, ALLIE_Saez, SAEZ. My website is currently under construction, so that'll be coming soon. But yeah, if you have any questions or tips or would like to just, you know, hear a little bit more about the gut health aspect of things, they're more than welcome to reach out to me.
Awesome. We'll make sure to link that in the show notes. Maybe your website is done by the time we put up this episode, so we'll see. We'll be in touch.
Great.
But then, again, thank you for your time, and then I'll talk to you soon.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Bye.